Cool. So today we are going to be looking at some of that information flow stuff we talked about yesterday. Start up a new. Cool. So I think I'm just going to jump in with an example and then talk about it um, afterwards. So I'm going to go ahead and share there, and we'll look at the same thing we were looking at yesterday. Great. Here's our little tarot card app. And here's the code for it. So just to kind of recap a little bit, we're rendering our app from the app.js. This is running great. So basically what we've got here is we've got a data file here. That's exporting this this object with a list of cards here that we're using. We're just importing that there and setting that in state. So if it changes, we'll re-render. We are grabbing that and displaying it by filtering the list of cards by major arcana. So we only get some cards. And then we map that into the actual card component. To see that, we pass in a image URL prop and a card title prop from the data, and we're also giving it a unique key so that it renders nice. And in the card, we are using that. In the card, we are pulling those out through destructuring and putting them into the image and title, and that gives us stuff like this here. We also have and I think this is what we're going to look at mostly today. Like that. We also have this form here that we are using to set up a new card. So when we input these, we are fully controlling this form. So what that means is that we have a form field for text fields for the name and image. When we type into it, we trigger an on change event, either one of these, and they set the current value of whatever you're typing to the state. So as you type, it's updating the state. And we also put the value of the state in there, which seems, people have asked me this before, seems like it would be like an infinite loop kind of thing. When we set the value, we change the state. When we change the state, we set the value. And this is where that asynchronous part of the set state comes in. When we set state, remember, we're not immediately setting state. We are submitting a request to React asynchronously to when they get a chance. Please update that state for us. So we get the state, it submits that request, it will re-render and set the value to the new thing, and then it won't change again until we type in it. So that's a fully controlled form. And again, we do that just to kind of, for a couple of reasons, to keep our, again, data as separated as possible from our display here. We have to put it in there somehow, but we're keeping the values outside of the HTML so that if we change the way we're displaying something, we don't have to worry about changing the data. And also this lets us keep the data in the form that we want. So we can, when we go ahead and submit and create that form, we can just use the data instead of having to pull it from the HTML. Cool. So that's where we left off. And so when we submit a new one, we're just updating the state. So we're using the spread operator to add that new card, and we're adding at the beginning just so we can see it here instead of having to scroll down. Cool. So information flow. If you remember yesterday, I started off by making a new card form here. And just to make sure I'm not missing anything, I'm going to copy that again. So here's our new card form, and new card form. Let's throw that in there. Bloop. And I'm going to take our on submit. I put it in here. Oop. Great. And since we are controlling that form, and this is one reason why we'd like to pull this out into a component of several reasons, is that state should be kind of like variables in a function or in a module. We'd like state to kind of represent just the state of the component as closely as possible. So the app as a whole, like we have this one form here, it's fine. If we have an actual application with 20 different elements that have data and state attached to them, we don't want to just dump them all up in an app. That'd be completely unreadable and unusable after in a very short time. So breaking things out is nice. So we are keeping the state here. Probably have to import use state React there. So we're doing the same thing here. We're fully controlling that form. And I'm going to go ahead and import this card form here and put it there. Oops. New card form. Awesome. So now we have that new card form. And yeah, there we go. That card name is not defined. Oh, get rid of this. Great. Set card's not defined. Yeah, great. So we're getting errors. Why is that? So if we look in our new card form and actually look at the errors, set cards is not defined. Yeah, that should probably be inside. Yeah, so set cards. Set cards is not a function here. We're not keeping that state. So we're keeping that up here. So we need some way for our component to talk to its parent. We can only pass props down, however. So that's going to be a problem. So, and kind of started talking about this last time. The way that we're going to do it here is we're going to change this state from the new card form by passing it a callback function. So props, we can pass down whatever we like, and a function can be one of those things. So I'm actually going to just pass down. So there's a few different things we can do, right? We can use this whole function, creating the thing. We can like push this up to the top. But we don't want app to worry about what the form looks like. Maybe the form will change, and we'll get the same kind of data, or maybe different data from the object. But we don't want the application as a whole to worry about the details of this form. So instead of just passing this whole function down and putting this function up here and having it do stuff in app, I'm just going to pass down the set cards. I think I'm just going to call it that. And so what is this doing here? So to review state, we're using the use state hook. And what that does is takes an initial state, a value, and gives us a setter and a getter and a setter. We get the value and we get something to update the value with. And this set cards, the setter, the thing that updates the value, that's just a function. And since the function is just an object, just a thing that we can pass around, we can send this function down here. So now we're giving that component the ability to change the state of the parent. And to do that, we're just going to grab it out of props. So we're not grabbing any props right now. So we can either do props like that and then say set cards equals props, set cards. We can do that. Or we can just destructure it directly. And that's my preferred way. Both because it's a little bit it's less typing for starters, but it also at the top of our component, our function here, we can look at the function definition and see what props it's using instead of going down here and spending a few extra seconds trying to figure out what's what. And it might even be down here, so we'd have to look through the whole component. If we do it this way, we know what it's getting. We can just look at that as a template to use when we're using it. So yeah, so we've passed down a function. This is its own component. It doesn't know anything about the outside world. It doesn't know anything about the application, except that it is getting this function from its parent. And then it's going to call that function on the submit. And in theory, it should do cards not defined. Where are we at? 36, 37. Aha. So yeah. So we do need cards there, don't we? So we can do two things. We can either pass cards in as another prop, but this feels like it's maybe exposing a little bit. So I think what I'd like to do is roll it back a little bit, and actually inside here, well, you know what? I'm gonna call it, instead of set cards, I'm gonna call it create card. There. So now we're expecting a prop called create new card here. And instead of just passing set cards in, I'm going to make a new function down here. And it's going to look like this. Create new card. And instead of taking the whole event and everything and having it do all this stuff up here, I'm just going to have it take the card object itself. And then I can just grab this stuff. I'm just going to pull it right here. So now all this is a function, and this function doesn't care about, I'll call it new card. There we go. Oh, that matches up. So this is just a function. It doesn't know that it's a callback function. It doesn't know that's being passed down to a child. We could even use it up here still if we want to. All it does is taking a card object and putting it on the front of the state, updating the state. If that gets called by a form or from a fetch coming back, or we're just using it somewhere else in here in this app, doesn't matter. This is just a function that takes a card object and updates the state. So now that we're passing that function down and we're grabbing it here, now we can say, so we're still preventing the default, we're still creating the card, and now we're just saying create new card with a new card. So now we're grabbing this function via destructuring. We're passing it in here. So it's passing this function in, and we're grabbing it and saying, hey, when you submit, create a new card, and then call that function. And I think we should be fine now. There we go. Cool. Let's see if it works. And the card image was, let's grab this dude. Great. And so now when we hit the button, if everything is cool, we should, let's walk through this. So we're filling out our form. As we filled out the form, we've updated the state, and we can prove that. Yeah, that's all fine. We can prove that by looking at the components and looking at our new card form, and we can see that those are in state. And this is another reason why we want to keep them in state fully controlled instead of just pulling them out of the form. Because as we change this, we can verify in our state. We can use debugging tools or whatever we need. We can we can see that state change as we do it. So we know the value that's being set is going to be what we want it to be. It's great. So as we're typing, we're changing that state. As we're when we submit, it's going to create the object out of that thing and then call this create new card function. Where is that coming from? It is on props create new card, and we are telling props that create new card is this function that we created here. And so all this function is doing is taking a new card. It is updating the state with an array that is spread out with the old cards and the new one. And we're just console logging out the length. We don't really need that. But and then so when we set the cards, we are enqueuing a request to update. When it does update, React will be like, hey, it updated. I should re-render. And then it does all this again and puts the new information in there. So let's see how much of that is a lie. Hey, none of it, as far as I can tell. And if we look in our component, right, we can still see here is our here's our new card right here. And if we look at apps, here's our new cards with the first one up here. And I think if we look at our console, hey, yeah, now we got 79 cards. And a full 8-1. Cool. Yeah, so this is honestly a little clunky. And that is for a couple reasons. But I'd like to open it up to questions here. What parts of this don't make sense or aren't clear for you right now? And this kind of thing is definitely on the code challenge. So if you have any anything that's not super solid, now is a great time. Everyone feeling super solid here? If you had to do this on a code challenge tomorrow or today, you could do it. All right, I believe you. We'll see. Great. So let me, as we're looking at this, let me talk a little bit about why, to me, it feels a little clunky, but we're going to keep doing it anyway. So, React, we have this component hierarchy. Let's look at it again. We have this component hierarchy, right? We have, an app inside of this. If this was a real app, I'd probably make this whole display down here. In fact, let's do it right now. Let's make a component here that is, what is it? Cards display, cards list. We'll call it card display. That's fine. Card display. So again, I'm going to grab this out, and I feel like that HR should be in the form, but I'm not going to do it. So I'm going to create a new component here, named after that. Card display. I don't feel like that's a great name, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to export the default function. Put that in there. And so what this is going to do, it's going to return. And I probably should put this in a div or something. Or a fragment, but a div will do for now. Cool. So this is just a function that is just returning this. The problem being that if we look, we will have one problem being that we haven't imported it. Caps. Cool. So now we're importing it, and we should get an error. Yes. Cards is not defined, and turn into card is not defined. So hey, look, let's pull this out here. Put that in there. And that needs to be in this function here. Um, cool. So now we should have the actual problem. Card is not defined. Card is not defined. Great. We don't even need to define card up here because we're not actually using it in the main app. We're using it down here in our card display. Awesome. Cool. Now we should just get cards is not defined. Great. So we're still mapping and filtering over cards here. And it should be returning this, and it's not for some reason. What do we need to do to get those cards to show up in our cards display component? Maddox.
Send on a prop with it in it.
Yeah, we should sure do. I'm just going to call it, I'm just going to call it cards, or while we're doing card list. And now I just need to grab it out of props here. I'm going to destructure, call it cards. Picky, but I'm going to call it cards here too. Cool. Nope. Yes. So now we're passing down cards as a prop. We're passing down the value of that state. And we are then grabbing our props with destructuring and then doing our filter and returning the same thing there. And notice since we are not manipulating the cards at all, we don't need any way to change that state. So, and we have this kind of like upside down V shape now, right? With our components, kind of looks like. How does my ASCII art go? It's got app, and then ASCII art, ASCII art. There we go. Card form, new card form, and our card display. So we've got this kind of triangle shape where app has our cards in state. We display the cards by passing that state down here to the card display. And we're also passing down the ability to change the card display, the card list in a certain way in our app here. Create new card. And in fact, it's not even create new card, right? I think I'd rather call it, what would I rather call it? That could be picky. Adding the card to the state or whatever. So we're passing down the ability to do that one thing, not just do whatever we want to the state, just that one thing down here. And then, of course, that's going to go back up to app. And then when that changes, it's going to pass down here. So we've got this little up and down kind of situation here. And at this level, this is fine. Another level down, it's still kind of fine. But if we had, if we had something like, gosh, I don't know. If we had something under here that, if card display was just a container and we actually like had the actual real card display component down here, we would just be passing down cards through here. This one wouldn't use it at all, except for to pass it down to the next one. So you're going to see this in projects. You're going to see this on the Go Challenge, and you're going to see it in your own projects. There will be times when you're passing your state, or more accurately, you're passing your data down through a container that doesn't use it at all. It's just a conduit to pass it down to the next level. That's tolerable, I think, at this scale. Once you start doing anything real, it's going to get painful real quick. And so there's kind of two tangents about that. The one is this is not the best way to do this in a real life situation. This is a good way to learn how this works. If you go to build your own app or even in your project, I recommend finding a different way to do this. And that different way is using a state management system. I think Redux is in the curriculum. I'm not a huge fan of, no, that's not true. I love Redux. I think Redux is fantastic. And in in you know, in big apps, definitely use it all the time. Um, there is a lot of heavy lifting. There's a lot of setup and a lot of understanding just what it does. What I like to use instead for smaller projects is called Recoil. And that does basically the same thing, only it behaves like states. So what do these do? These kind of, and I'm kind of skipping ahead, but I think we got this. These kind of, sit outside our data store. These kind of sit outside. They create data stores, they're called, that sit outside of our application. So instead of everything living up an app and then we have to pass it around like this, we wouldn't have that stuff at all in app. And we just have the data store connected to this component and this component down here. We'd never have to pass anything through this container. App doesn't need to know about the data up top. So we have this data store that kind of exists beside our application that can poke into components when we need it. And I'll do a whole thing on that probably next week. Redux is great. I love Redux. If you feel like learning Redux, definitely do it. If you would like a way that takes 10 times less time to learn, I'll show you how to use Recoil. And so this is, this is handy, not just for practical purposes, like you don't have to put these containers and, oh, if, I had something 3 levels down that I had to pass down, but then, design decided to move that component somewhere else in the hierarchy, then we'd have to rewire all that stuff. Using a data store, you don't need to do that. So practically, that's that case. More philosophically, I guess, state in React components is intended to describe just that. It's intended to describe the state of the component. So what's in a form? Is this thing dark mode or light mode? Is this modal displaying or not? Which thing has this user selected? So those are describing the state of that component itself. This data here that we're getting from our, we'll either fetch it or get it from somewhere. This data doesn't really describe anything about the app component. This data is used by the app component. And that's a really subtle distinction. And I don't think we talk about it anywhere in the curriculum, but I think it's really important, not only for practical purposes, but also sort of to understand what state is and which pieces of state need to be where. Like our, our form, these pieces of state, app doesn't need to know anything about those. And in fact, we don't want app to know anything about them, because if we decided to move this component somewhere else or use it in another place, we don't want to have that dependency coming down. We want all that state to be local. So basically, we want the state of a component, which describes the state of the component, to be, as tightly scoped, I guess, as possible. So, we could definitely put these up in app and then pass the getters and setters down. That might not be too odious for this one, but once we have more than a couple components, it's going to get real ugly real fast. So yeah, keeping state as local as possible is great. We're not doing it now, but keeping your data separated from the, again, display the state of that component. It's useful, but for now, this is how we're going to do it. This is the simplest way to do it without learning a whole other thing. We just got passed stuff around. Yeah, philosophy tangent. Any thoughts about that stuff, or anything that's, I probably didn't explain it clearly. What questions do you have about it? Or is there enough that you don't understand that you're not able to ask a good question yet? And if so, let me know what parts you're not understanding.
I guess I struggle with understanding like setting sometimes setting the initial state.
Yeah.
Like maybe I'm trying to maybe I'm thinking of the state as like too many pieces like being part of the state and it should be something smaller. Um so
Can you give
like
me an example?
yeah. So one example, um, I haven't worked through it much yet, but like in the hog, the what's it called, Hog Wild app,
Yeah.
uh, with all the piggies. Um, so there, one thing it asks to do is like when you click it, on page load, it'll display like the image and the name. So super easy, just two things, have that show up automatically. And then so like in this case, right, like the fool or like the card name and the card image, and then it wants on the click to then display a bunch of other you know details from the object. And so, my first kind of thought process around it, I'm like, okay, well, the initial state would be like just the image and the name, whereas the new state would be image, name, and then three or four other uh, attributes.
So it's let me see if I'm getting it straight. So are you having trouble kind of figuring out where the data for each individual one should live as opposed to the collection? Is that what I'm getting?
Um, I guess it's more like do I need to set the state for like for each individual one?
Hmm.
It's like to go very basic, right? Like initial state is like display version 1, new state would be display version 2, right? They're different. And it's just, and again, then I get to the point as I'm speaking of like I don't really understand what I'm not understanding, but I know I'm not understanding.
Yeah, that's definitely where we find ourselves a lot of time. Let me pull this down and we'll walk through some of that stuff and maybe looking at it more concretely can help us. Back there, clone.
And I guess part of it too is um like the naming of the things when I'm setting the state.
Mhm.
So, like in one of the examples, it was, used to do is dark mode, set is dark mode. But then there was like nothing in like the CSS or anywhere I could see that was straight up called
Hmm.
dark mode. So I'm naming these things, but I don't know like what I'm actually naming.
Cool. Is that in the base code or is that something that we added?
In this one, it's like you have to add in like everything, like it was all free.
Hey, look, there's a solution branch. 3, 2, 2, 3. Yeah, sure, why not? So cool. Did we have? Nope. No, it's not gonna do it. So let's kind of look at where we'd put stuff and think about it. So the is that in the README, for example?
It would be like up in the top, like the first and second pieces under the deliverables, right? So I got the first one, right? Load the name and the image, and
Mhm.
then on the click, it needs to load all these other things. So I'm like, okay, initial state would be name and image, new
Yeah.
state, other stuff.
Okay, cool. I think I know what you're asking. So uh, let's look at this. We have our data here, and right now we're just importing it. I believe we're not using fetch yet, but we have an array of pig objects. So here in our app, we're bringing that data in, so we have that available, and we are passing that whole list in, so that that entire list of objects is going into this helpfully named Porkers component. And this is
And
kind of like our big
for
card.
whoever makes these things, like the fact that they have they calling them porkers, they're calling them hogs, and they're calling them pigs.
Yeah,
Like,
not
we
consistent.
just pick one.
Yep, I agree. I totally agree. Um, so yeah, so we're porkers, hogs, pigs. Yeah, so we're passing that list in here, and this kind of acts like our. Do I still have it up? Yeah, this kind of acts like our card display component, right? This is our big list of stuff that we're
Mhm.
passing our full array into. So that full list is getting pulled into props and it exists as this hogs variable or constant. And interestingly enough, we're not setting it in state. So we we have that there, and so make sure I'm getting what you're asking here. When we display, so this is our display of all of them. This is structured weird. If hogs do display. Okay, cool. Yeah, we're doing a map here. So when we're displaying each one, we're kind of doing our map the same way as we're doing in card display. We're taking our cards or hogs and we're mapping them into components. So if we look at this one here, we are mapping them from the hog object, which is the object, and we're creating this tile for it. So just kind of overview again. That data, that list of pig objects lives right now only here in app. We're passing that down, and we're not passing down any way to change it. So this is read only, right? We're passing that whole list down to this component, and this component's whole job is to display them somehow. And the way it's doing that is mapping the list of objects to a list of components. And then each one of these components, these porker tiles, each one of them is taking, frankly, too many props. And that's not how I would do that. Passing all these props in individually to the porker tile. And so the tile, again, it doesn't have any state or data of itself. It only knows what you're passing it in through props. So and since we're passing them individually, like the pig as a whole doesn't exist for this tile. It's only these properties that's sending down, and it's putting those each in there. So that's describing what's happening. Can you ask your question again, kind of in this context?
Yes. So yeah, so as I see it now here, like I'm seeing, they want us to set the state in reference to like the clicked status, right? Was it clicked or not?
Yeah.
I guess that's just. I guess my mind went there, right? Obviously, with like the function to handle the click, but I was thinking of the state more as being like what was displaying.
Yeah, and that's what we're getting through props. So both of these are, they kind of exist in parallel. We whether we're using it for data or something else, we've got these two these two kind of buckets of stuff that live side by side in a component. We have the states that we set up, and those states, when they get changed, that's how we know how to re-render. And then alongside that, we have whatever data we're passing down through props. And as far as the component is concerned, those are static and they don't change. They only change when, if we change the state up here and passed in something else, it would re-render that whole thing with new data. So basically, like, I guess you can kind of think of it as inside a component, state is stuff that you can change, and props are things that you need to display it or whatever, but they're read only. You can't change those inside the component. Outside, sure. Does that help a little bit?
It does, yeah, it does. And then kind of follow-up question. would be like, when I see it now, I see like, oh, okay, like the state of clicked, yes or no, makes sense. But then we're kind of just a top level misunderstanding is like setting is clicked.
Mhm.
Like I don't know, like I obviously it's referencing whether or not it's clicked, but like where does that live?
Yeah, so that is one of the things that lives in state. So this is a value that lives inside of our component that describes something about the component. And we are able to change it through the provided method so that when it changes, we can re-render.
So
And so that data
I
lives.
get that, but then like when we set state, right, we decide to call it
Yeah.
is clicked. I guess that feels a bit abstract to me of like, so like in theory, would this work if I just instead of call like clicked makes sense, because that's what we're doing. But if I called it is Travis,
Mhm.
it just set is Travis and just had it all be the same, like would it still work?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. They're just variable names. You can call it, sandwich or whatever. Um, yeah, the variable names are strictly for us. We can call them ABC if we want. Um, the JavaScript doesn't know what clicked means outside of its keywords. So whatever we call this variable, and that's kind of why I like get picky about variable names sometimes, because their sole purpose is to communicate to the programmer or whoever else is working on it or reading it, what this thing is or what it does. Which is why, like you said, naming anything like pigs, hogs, porkers, like all accurate, but also kind of confusing. This is a programming language, right? And the purpose of language is to communicate something. And in programming language, it's to communicate in two ways. It's to communicate what we'd like the computer to do to the computer, but it's also communicating the meaning of what we're doing to other programming, including ourselves in the future, right? So yeah, so these variable names are purely for our sake. We can literally call them whatever we want. And if you look at, the, can I find some good stuff here. If we look at, let's see if we can find yeah, so like this gets, this isn't compressed or anything. You'll find code that is, when it gets compiled into React or JavaScript from React or from whatever to whatever, or even just minified, you'll see it actually will take all the stuff we've written and turn it into variables like A, B, C, D, E, X, because the semantics of the variable names are only important to humans. And so if is clicked works for you, that's great. If you know we can think of it in another way. Like this is communicating whether this has been clicked or not, right? Um, and you might argue like, hey, that's not totally accurate because if we click it twice, it has been clicked. It just goes back to not being clicked. Clicking it twice doesn't equal clicking it 0 times. So it might make more sense to you to say, this is, show front, since we are using it to decide which part we are showing, right? Or show, so set show front. And so, when it is, I guess would be true, right? So if we wanted to say, set show front equal not set show front. Again, not the best way to do it, but it communicates something slightly different. But behavior-wise, it behaves exactly the same. This is more describing what is being displayed, whereas the is clicked is describing how it's been interacted with. And they both work. And if you're working on a team with more than you, that might be a discussion you have about how you want to communicate these things. Yeah, but at the end of the day, the state itself, internally, the component, it's exactly the same. Does that kind of get at what you're asking?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I just need more practice in well in general, but also yeah, I'm either trying to go like too big picture
Mhm.
or not big picture enough at times and
Yeah.
getting that state put into wrong places, I think.
Yeah. And one of the advantages that we have working in React as opposed to, look at our last projects, like everything was in one big JavaScript file, whether it was an actual file or not. So you kind of like that kind of forces you to always kind of look at your stuff in context of the big picture. Whereas using a library or framework like React, or Angular or Vue or whatever, anything that breaks stuff down into components, or even if you're writing stuff and break it down into functions, right? Which components are, um, being being zoomed into whatever the thing that you're working on, is the most useful. So, and if we were a team of three people, one person could be concerned with the overall architecture of the app and how it deals with data and how these components that we're building are on the main page. They don't need to know how they work or what they look like or whatever. They only care that these things are the things that we agreed upon that are going to be on the main thing. And then another person could be working on this 2 levels down, and they don't care who's using it, where it is on the page or in the app. All you need to focus on here is this tile, this Porker tile. Our only concern is taking in some information via props and displaying that information in a certain way. Where it's put in the app, how it's used, how data is sent to it, not important at this level. Literally, all we care about is what this one thing is doing. And so, working on a sort of component architecture like this really lets us zoom into a level of detail so we can work on just what we need here and not worry about how it fits in the big picture. And then when we zoom back out here, we're like, okay, cool. I need to keep, maybe I need to do a fetch for this data instead of loading it in, or I need to pass in, I'm going to pre-filter it or whatever before sending it in. Those are architecture decisions. And then in the middle here, same thing. I don't care where I'm getting this list. Um, the app could be importing it. It could be loading it through Fetch. You could have users manually enter them. This component does not care at all. All it knows is that I'm getting a list of pigs that are in a certain way. And I also don't care what the tile looks like or how it's implemented. All I know is that my job is to take this list of things and put their data into these tiles and put them on the page. I don't care how that tile works internally. All I care about is what it's asking for. And so we don't have to worry about the big picture, but we also don't have to worry about the details of the components that we're using. So yeah, and kind of it's definitely a learned skill to kind of let your brain relax into the shape of the thing that you're working on, right? Because you could be working down here on this tile, or even further down, maybe the image has a certain component that does something certain. And as humans, we care about what we're doing, so we care about where this is, how data is getting put there, what it looks like in relation to other things. And it's definitely like a skill to kind of relax your brain and say, this is what I'm working on right now. Nothing outside of it matters. It's
Yeah.
hard. Yeah, it's not easy or intuitive. It just comes with practice.
Oh yeah, I'll get there. I'm definitely when I am going through like the checklist of setting state, right? Like, does this layer need it?
Mhm.
Does this next one up need it? And I'm going, yeah, the one up there does need it. But I'm wrong.
Yeah, and again, like we're we're programmers, not sculptors, right? We can think, oh, I need, and you'll see me do this in walkthroughs all the time. I'll like put something somewhere and then code a little bit and be like, oh, you know what? Actually, this would be here instead. That would be better there. The nature of our work is that it's completely flexible and mutable, and so we can kind of start with our best guess and not have to get everything perfect in the first place. And then as we go and change our minds and be like, oh, I should call this variables this because it's more clear. I should put this data in a different place and pass it through a different place. Right. So,
Yeah.
And even more so, that's someone's even more so, like using Git, like it gives us so much flexibility. We can just like fuck around and we never have to find out. Like we can make all sorts of mistakes, and if we decide it's a bad idea, revert it and go back to the branch we were on before. So yeah, give yourself permission to try stuff, and more importantly, change stuff when you feel like it doesn't work. And if the change isn't good, just roll it back or try something else. That flexibility and experimentation is like one of the pure joys I think we have as programmers that a lot of places don't have. So
yeah, that's one of the reasons I wanted to switch to this from sales.
Yeah.
Okay, one tiny question, and I'll let someone else ask a question. Can you remind me the hotkey for like updating every instance of something in VS Code, right? Like if I needed to,
the multiple select.
yeah.
So if I double click on set show front, that selects that and it highlights the other instances, maybe, or divs. So like, oh, these are all divs. And so if I hit Command D, or on Windows Control D, I think it is, you'll see it changes it to the select color. It's kind of subtle in this theme. And then I'm like, oh, these actually want to be sections.
So
and I probably marked a bunch of other stuff because I mistyped. There we go. And so that'll do multiple edits there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Super useful all the time. Also, the one that people don't know a lot about sometimes is the moving a line around with option up and down, or copying it with shift option and moving that around. Super helpful and saves a lot of dragging and cutting and pasting.
Sweet.
Cool. Who else has questions? Okay. Well, since we don't have any questions, we should be able to rock through Hogwild with no problem. So yeah, I recommend doing exactly that. Hogwild is a pretty good one. I think we also have. I know my view is different than yours, but it should be the same. Yeah, these two are good. Do we not have? There's a mock challenges. Yeah, I don't like that these are mock challenges. I'm going to open these up later on. You can find them on GitHub if you really want to look for them. But these all use the fetch stuff, so we'll talk about the fetch stuff tomorrow. It's pretty straightforward, very similar to what you've been used to. So yeah, but right now, the states and props and events and all that stuff, information flow should have a pretty good handle on. So yeah, Poket, Hogwild, and ReactTube, those should give you some good exercise. If you are working through them, and even like Travis was saying, like even if it's a kind of conceptual thing that you don't really have words for yet, give me a holler, and we'll find those words and try and knock down what it is. Because yeah, getting fluency on like those two labs is going to serve you super well going forward. Cool. I think that's about all we have right now. Any final questions before we wrap it up? All right then. As usual, I'll post this video in on playlist and in the channel, and feel free to holler at me anytime. otherwise, enjoy your lunch and career services workshop, and I'll see you for stand down. Thanks for hanging out.